Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom podcast. My guest today is Steven from Coffee Break YouTube channel, and he's also got this awesome side series called CoffeeZilla, where he investigates into YouTube gurus, particularly of the financial sort. And I asked him if he ever does the spiritual sort as well, because there's a whole other sorted world there as well. But welcome to the show, Steven.
Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, excited to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. It's so I'd love to understand you're doing. I didn't even know about your other YouTube channel, and then in preparation for this, I saw that you do this whole other YouTube channel, which I assume is helping people with technology. But the real reason I found you was because a friend of mine posted one of your videos of going after this guru, and I was like, whoa, this guy's just been like goes in details exactly how guru develops this persona that people latch onto, and then pay them money for. And it was so interesting. How did you start this? Why did you start this?
I started it because I was just seeing it started because of Ty Lopez primarily. I was just annoyed by seeing his ads, but I thought he was kind of the whole picture. And then one day I saw this other guy, Mike Vestal or something like that. And he's like this 20-year-old millionaire in Bali, whatever. And I know enough to know that's not a thing, right? Like this guy's totally faking it. But I was looking at his comments, and they're all positive. They're like, Mike, you're so amazing, Mike. You're so incredible. And he's basically telling him, hey, yeah, you can live like me. You can be just like me. And this is what I didn't know the business model yet. So that he goes, if you come and join my course. So for those of you at home, there are these internet gurus who they deliver and they present this lifestyle, and then they basically say, hey, I did it the hard way. You can do it the easy way. Go sign up for my course, which usually is an astonishing $2,000 or $1,000 or $3,000. And my main problem with it was always, and still is, who are these people targeting, right? They are not targeting companies. They are not targeting people with their lives together. They are targeting poor, desperate people. And so I was like, how is nobody talking about this? This is and the more I dive in, the more I realize what a gigantic $1 million problem this is. People are making fortunes off the back of poor people. I mean, like poor, desperate people who want to improve their lives. What is going on?
It's absolutely crazy. And and this is an interesting thing for me because I've been doing yoga. I've been teaching yoga. I've been sharing yoga and meditation for a while now. And there's such a ethical thing with teaching consumers, not businesses. And this is why I want to teach to businesses, also harder to get into businesses as well. But there's something about the nature when you're providing something to somebody, this image making, and this is the whole thing we get into with yoga itself, is that there is a natural tendency for a human being to create an image and then try to become that image. And then what these guys are doing are taking that process, saying, I've done it. I love what you said about, I did it the hard way. I'll give you the secrets to do it the easy way. And I think that's the key, because there is no easy way. It's all contextual, and particularly if you're signing up for a course.
Yeah. I mean, people ask me all the time, well, Steven, what do you think about this guru? Because I've done enough of these, people are starting to like look to me as like, oh, he must know who the real gurus are. And I'm like, no, if you're looking for a shortcut, you're asking the entire wrong question. Like, this is the wrong way to look at things. But yeah, they're abusing a mentality that most people have, which is like, you look like success. People look like success. So they dress up in the suit. They get in the Lamborghini, which they rented. They all rent the Lamborghini, guys. They don't actually have a Lamborghini. They rent the Lamborghini. They rent a nice house. They make a little video on it. They portray this lifestyle, which they do not have at the moment. But here's the crazy thing. Actually, this is interesting. So they don't have the lifestyle when they start, but they get enough people to buy in that they become rich. And so they will at one point be like, no, I really own the Lambo maybe, or I really own the house. And maybe they do. But they didn't get rich because they learned how to do e-commerce, which they're supposedly selling you how to do. They got rich because of suckers like you who paid for their Lamborghini. It's so crazy when you think about it. Poor, desperate people looking to escape their 9-to-5 are paying for Lamborghinis. They're paying for houses for rich gurus. It's crazy. It's crazy.
So there's two things to that. There's the fake it till you make it, which is okay to a tiny extent. I think I'm not sure about that. And I come from Silicon Valley, where that is an accepted thing. You fake it until you make
Right.
it.
Right.
And so and that is there's a lot of that going on in Silicon Valley, which gets me to the next point, which is Lamborghini's cryptocurrency. Have you taken any cryptocurrency gurus down? If not, you should.
No, dude. Really, the problem is I feel like I just scraped the tippity tip of the iceberg. I'm like, I keep telling people, because people ask me, they're like, oh, I love your series, but aren't you going to run out of gurus? And I say, like, every time I take down a guru, I find two more, clawing their way up to the top. It's mind blowing, and people don't understand the money in this. That is the biggest thing I try to communicate to people, is how much money is being ripped out of the hands. Because I mean, if they were stealing, if they were I won't say stealing, because that's a legal term, but if they were kind of, taking people's money for, like, I don't know, $10,000, people would have less of a problem with it. People with small channels, like 50,000 subscribers, are getting $1 million per course. Like, they sell $1 million worth of product, $2 million. I mean, it is the most profitable way to run a YouTube channel right now, is like to basically scam people. It is a gigantic scam. And those are the small fries. Those are small potatoes. I mean, we talk about some of the bigger channels. They're making tens of millions of dollars a year off of broke, desperate people. It's like, I mean, that's basically the headline. On your point about fake it till you make it. So I kind of have a philosophy on what is acceptable, what is unacceptable in terms of advertising. So basically, most advertising, we all know advertising isn't the most honest profession. You can't call out all false advertising. Where I draw the line is in health, wealth, and happiness, because health, wealth, and happiness are inelastic demanded products, right? Like, there's an inelastic demand for health. If I have cancer and you tell me your little miracle water cures my cancer, that is a statement that not only am I predisposed to believe, because my doctor told me I'm terminal, whatever, but I'll also pay you any amount of money for it. This is also true of money. If you tell me you can make me $1 million, well, I can justify spending thousands of dollars, which I don't have. Maybe it's next month's rent, but I can justify it in my head because I'm like, well, he is going to make me millions of dollars. So this, like, makes sense. This is where false advertising should be routinely called out, and we should have high standards for the advertising. I mean, like, if you make it seem like my iPhone case is going to make my life a little bit better, yeah, it's fine, but I'm only going to pay up to a point. This is where you're right about the spiritual gurus, because they also are solving a problem with inelastic demand. You can just charge any amount of money. So I have a problem with how much money people are charging, and I have a huge problem with how they're advertising. Over and over and over, I do not see the true claim, which is, hey, this is really hard work. It's probably not going to work for you. It rarely works for anybody, and you have to get extremely lucky to make a living off this, much less a fortune. What I actually see is, hey, quit your 9-to-5 job. All those losers at Starbucks are just working away, and go be a laptop lifestyle guru with me, dude. Get out of here. Get them out of here.
It's also happening in the digital nomad thing too. I guess it's how it works with anything. So I wonder what you just said about there. It's hard. It's probably not going to work for you. You probably shouldn't do this. I wonder if anybody has ever used that successfully as a sales pitch. Can you use that as a sales pitch?
I don't know if I think it's just a true statement. I mean, I think, like, if you market a drug, it isn't a sales pitch to say, like, it might not work for you. It's just the truth.
But that's the question is can you sell the truth, or do you have to mask the truth in order to sell it?
The truth becomes integrity and like respect within a community. And then over time, you can build up a legacy of people listening to you. But it's hard to initially be a sales pitch. And this is why so many gurus do it, is because they're in an ecosystem which competes with a bunch of other gurus lying. And so even if you start as an honest guru, you either will get weeded out because no one wants to watch a video about how tough entrepreneurship is when somebody else is saying how you can make millions of dollars a day. So, like, you're either weeded out or you join and try to one up everybody else. And so this is why it's hard when people say, where are the real gurus? It's like, well, they probably quit because it's really hard to be a real guru right now because people don't want the hard answers. People want the easy answers.
So that brings another nature of the discussion, is that there's also the demand side of it as well. And the demand creates the supply in a sense. It's co-creative. So the suppliers supply something, the people coming in for it, we're like, oh, I like that. And then as you said, then they create the lifestyle. They actually become that lifestyle due to this kind of nature of it. And the people who are telling the truth are doing it quietly, and aren't making a big fuss about it because that's not part of the truth. I think. I don't know.
No. I mean, you're absolutely right. And look, I don't tell people don't go and try to do something, that's risky. I mean, I have a chemical engineering degree. I've never done chemical engineering. I jumped straight into YouTube. It's a risky activity. I knew it was risky. I took the jump. I took the plunge. I do it full time now. I had to get some side jobs while I was working, but like while it wasn't working yet. So I'm not a stranger to taking risks on like kind of by the numbers, sort of insane ideas. I just think you should do that with the full knowledge of what it is. And especially when people are taking your already weak resources. Like when I wanted to start YouTube, if I had paid for a $2,000 course, I might not be here right now because I might not have money, because a lot of it was just like scraping together my resources, pulling them together. So when people say like, oh, here's the shortcut to definitely be successful, I just think like you're hurting more entrepreneurs than you're helping. And mostly you're just scamming people, but that's the whole thing.
So that gets into burn rate, which is that is something from Silicon Valley that is really like something most people get burned into their heads, particularly because the burn rate is larger here. But is that, yeah, when you're starting something new, the most important thing to do is cut your costs. And I'm actually about to do it, as we were discussing before the show. I've been now doing interviews for about 2 years. And I've gotten really lucky with my guests coming on, but I haven't been lucky with the subscribers and everything. Or not lucky, maybe I'm not doing the right things, but essentially it's taking longer than I expected. So I'm now going to cut my burn rate and also investigate something I've been meaning to investigate for a long time, and cross a linguistic border, which I'm really interested about. So yeah, it's like burn rate. And then I guess, what are the other things that you've learned from doing your YouTube channel that these gurus kind of ignore or repress?
What are things that I do in my YouTube channel that gurus are not, like, they're not saying or they're not doing?
They're not saying, so they're not saying is a part of it. Like what? So you have burn rate, which is.
Oh yeah, no, they just overrepresent the income opportunity. I mean, so like Amazon FBA, Amazon Fulfilled by Amazon, it's like a version of drop shipping that's a little bit easier. And so this guy, all these guys that come on and they say Amazon's a $1 trillion a year business and you can have your slice too. First of all, they don't tell you that the market's extremely saturated. The amount of third-party Amazon sellers that are coming on right now is insane. And the number of people who actually sell, okay, there's a lot here. So I'll break down one example and just assume that this applies across, because all the gurus do a different industry. So we're just going to focus on Amazon FBA because there's kind of a lot to it. So here's what the guru will tell you. It's a $1 trillion industry. You can make tons of money. That like your piece of the pie is just waiting for you. And look at this guy. He did $30,000 in sales. Okay. Great. $30,000 in sales, whatever. Usually, by the way, those sales numbers are from giveaways. They encourage people to do giveaways to get rankings on Amazon. So it's like they're not profiting. And that's what they never say, is they never say profit. So out of that 30K, they probably actually lost $1,000. They've just basically sold the product for less than it's actually worth, right? And then they're posting their numbers so they can get ranked on Amazon and people check out their product. But then, even if they're selling $30,000 in units, Amazon FBA, they take a cut. There's also the original cost of the product, because these people are drop shipping. They're not actually producing the product. And so your average margins are like 15%. So if you actually run the numbers, I think it's like 30,000 drops to like 3,000, which all of a sudden, or 3,000 or 5,000, which all of a sudden, that's an okay income, but it's not the thing you promised me, which is making a fortune. And so what you actually find out is, like, when they say, oh, there's 2% of all Amazon sellers are millionaires, for example, they make $1 million in sales. Even that, you're only $1 million a year. That's like 150K. I mean, that's a good income, but that's 2% of third-party sellers. And so when you say 2% are millionaires, people think, oh, I'm a millionaire now. No, you're just like middle class. I mean, you're like middle class. If you're in California, you're not even doing that well. I mean, California is so insane right now. But I was just there to see my brother. But this is the misrepresentation. So by not including the actual details of the business, people want to sign up because they think there's so much more money in it than there is. This is a very similar thing to MLMs. I think there's a lot of overlap with MLMs and with fake gurus. And I think fake gurus are sort of the evolution of MLMs kind of fizzling out to a large extent. People know it's a scam. And this is the sort of new thing where it's like, let me package somewhat banal information, sell it for $1,000, call it coaching, and, you know, wrap it up in a day. But yeah, no, that, I mean, like the big problem is just like, is the information. They oversell the opportunity and it turns into false advertising. Yeah.
This is very interesting. So it's just like a very deeply human thing to want to believe somebody, particularly when they tell you that it's all easy and that you're going to make a lot of money. And it seems like a timeless thing of human nature is that a lot of people fall into it, particularly young people. And then it's evolving. And this is why I would love to see you do one on a cryptocurrency thing, because there are so many good ones there. And that's also the evolution of MLM is now they're recreating it in cryptocurrency type of things.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
I'll just say something real quick. Run away anytime you hear someone talk about a proven system. Anytime you hear someone talk about, oh, you know, like this is the new way to make millions. Look, people who are making millions, they did it with opportunity. Opportunity is everything. You can't start Microsoft today. You can't. Bill Gates did it. It's too late. There's already a Bill Gates. You know what I mean? There's already a Facebook. You can't remake Twitter. We've seen people try to remake platforms, and their problem is they don't have the opportunity. So when people say there's limitless opportunity, I made $1 million. Well, that guy probably took the opportunity. You know, there's probably nothing. There's every time someone does something, it becomes less profitable to go redo the exact same thing. So it just blows my mind. And I feel like that's a core thing to understand when evaluating, you know, is this worth doing? Is this not worth doing? The central thing you have to ask yourself is like, is the opportunity still there? It could have been real at one time. You know, the gold rush was once real. Very quickly, the people who like came late, the gold's gone, man. And
by the time you hear about it, it's probably gone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what is the antidote to this? If you're going to, you know, like for me, it's like skepticism, but how do you train yourself to be skeptical?
That's a good question. I think maybe a lot of people get burned. Yep. Hopefully some people watch my videos and they realize, oh, there's not just one person doing this. There's hundreds of gurus out there doing this. I should not, you know, fall for this stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is true. Is like just anytime someone's trying to get you to pay thousands of dollars, you should have a really high standard of evidence. And you should also have a really high standard of like knowing that you want it to be true. That is a huge problem. It's like you are naturally going to want to make millions of dollars. And so you have to like almost fight against yourself. And the old saying is always true. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. It's so often said that it's banal and like we think it's stupid. But I think if you just lived with that as a motto, you're so unlikely to get scammed.
Yeah. And it goes back to something I learned from Robert Sapolsky, who is a neurobiologist at Stanford. He talks about the amygdala, and then around the amygdala, we have this added part of the amygdala, which is allows us to learn distrust and fear. So we start off as babies as being open to everything and trusting of everything. And then we learn through experience, or hopefully our parents kind of educating us or society educating us to be distrustful of others, which is something interesting as we live in this society. It already happened when we moved to cities that were around strangers. You know, before we would have known everyone that was around us. And now we moved to cities and now there are hustlers out there, hustlers in the negative sense. And now we got the internet, which is like a jump up from the city, which is now it's like, there are people who are malevolent and will try to get you. And how do we learn this? And that's the other thing about the internet. The internet essentially is in many ways making us more trustworthy of people. But then we've also got to remind ourselves that there are people out there who will try to do something, who will take advantage of you.
I want to say something real quick. Like, I don't think we should put this all on the consumer, by the way. There are reasons we have fake advertising laws. It shouldn't be okay to just say things that are not true. Like, you know, we don't expect people to be skeptical of drugs. We just say like, you can't just say a drug does something and it doesn't do what you say it does. You need evidence for like these things. I think this is true of this kind of advertising. One of my big issues is like YouTube, Facebook, they allow this type of advertising. Facebook has cracked down a bit, unbelievably. Facebook is more tough than YouTube is, which blows a lot of people's minds. But because I know they're in a lot of trouble because they're not tough on ads, historically. But they're even tougher. But it's like you can still say so much on Facebook, and you can advertise, and Facebook will target. They'll help you get sales. Like, imagine how insane that is. Yeah. We are not prepared. We as a society, we have not had a good conversation around algorithmic targeting, and if it's okay, like if we think it's fine. Because what you can do now, for those of you at home who don't know, like you can run a Google ad campaign, and you can say, like, look, I want you to maximize conversions. Normally, that's good. If you're a sneaker person, they'll sell to people who need sneakers. But if you're selling snake oil, what you're essentially asking Google to say is, get the dumbest people in the room. Get the most gullible people that you can find in my room, and I want to pitch those people. And that's what Google's doing. They're maximizing your sales. And if you're selling snake oil, then by definition, it's the most gullible people. And Google's helping. They're complicit in this. So, I mean, as to their exact level of responsibility, I think I can't answer that question. But I think it's important to think, we can't just endlessly let people advertise and expect the consumer to just be like super knowledgeable and, endlessly observant. I think I do it because Google is not going to make a decision in the near future, but I want to make myself obsolete. I don't want to have to do these things forever. Because there are going to be endless gurus, and I don't have endless time. So it's like, let's fix the problem, which is that these guys can endlessly advertise to young people.
This gets into a big thing I talk about on the show a lot, which is essentially there's this belief, particularly in Silicon Valley, of technology, put the technology out there, it'll figure itself out. And then, that's not true. I was actually just talking to my dad earlier today. We're going to do a series where we live stream every Saturday, and he was a journalist, and he basically covered the rise of technology. And in the beginning, the internet was started with an ethos from universities that it's going to be free and it's going to be open, and that you're not going to charge any more amount of money for people getting better access or lower access or anything like that. It's going to be free and open and fair and equitable to everybody. And that was true for a long time until I would put it on Facebook as the first walled garden that really thought about how do we corner off a section of the internet, make it totally opaque to the rest of the internet, and created a walled garden. And now we have a whole country doing it in China, where it's like, you're not getting past China's firewall. And people thought, oh no, that's going to be impossible. There's no way that you can police the internet. And you most definitely can. And the Chinese are doing it, and they're exporting it. And so there is an ethical implication to whatever we create. If you're creating a gun, you have responsibility. This is a claim I'm making. You have responsibility in the violence that gun has to do with it. I'm not arguing for the necessity of violence, because sometimes violence is necessary, but anybody creating these tools has an ethical implication, but it's not clear what that ethical implication is.
Right. I totally agree. Yeah. Like it's like but it's like, would we put someone in jail for that? I don't know. It's really hard to say. I think it also it matters the cultural adoption of these things too, right? Like, so I think the internet was less scrutinized for a while because they were sort of the underdog, sort of fighting up, and the young people knew about it, but it wasn't really now everyone's on the internet. Everyone's getting their information online. And so much more now that it's the dominant cultural force, we are looking at it and we're like, wait, are we happy with this? Like, are we happy with the way things are? You talked about a walled garden, and I think that's interesting because as a YouTuber, I mean, I'm personally touched by this, but I've noticed that these companies, they hide so much that is so important. Particularly, I'm talking about the algorithms, how their algorithms work. And they say it's because they like it's proprietary, et cetera. But there's so much that is going on behind the scenes that hides any culpability that you could have had. Mm-hmm. So in the example of gurus, right? Like if a guru used to be able to target by income, right? And that's really, I mean, that gets into like the scummiest thing you could do. Like, because you could like target low income, desperate people. Okay. Google took away that targeting option, right? So you can't do that anymore. Great. I think that's a good thing. However, when you do algorithmic, basically optimization, You end up doing it,
Mm.
but with no accountability because the algorithm is doing it. So like Google, because Google says, well, we won't tell you what your demographic is. So if they don't tell you, you don't ever have to have the responsibility of knowing who you're targeting. And so like it puts you in such a weird position because you can basically have total deniability of what you're doing because, oh, I let an algorithm do it. It's not my fault. It's an algorithm did it. It's like if Tesla's a Tesla gets pulled over and it's on autopilot. You know, who's accountable? Is the AI accountable? Is Tesla accountable? It's like, because they're not making their algorithm public. You don't have public testing. So yeah, this is a huge problem.
That's really interesting. And there's an argument to be made, and I can't make it because I'm not an expert in it, but that the people actually creating it can't peer into the algorithm and actually understand how it's working. They can define variables, and I've interviewed enough AI people, and I should probably ask one of them about this, whether you can actually get a good understanding of how good your understanding can be of these algorithms and how much influence you can take and see into it. Or is it like something like, a SSRI antidepressant where we just kind of know that it works for some people, but we don't really know how it's working. We're just kind of like, yeah.
This is a great point. No, this is a great point. And it's true that most neural nets, when they get sufficiently complex, they just become black boxes. I'm not an AI guy, but I've worked on some projects that do this. And I've talked to enough people to know that, yeah, like it becomes a black box situation where it goes in, it comes out, and all you see is what goes in and goes out, right? The problem is Google isn't really telling you what comes out. Like they're hiding it, right? So we don't actually know what's going in and what's going out. We only know sort of, or I guess maybe sometimes they cover what's in, because sometimes they cover the variables they're considering when targeting, right? So it's like, it'd be really useful to know, hey, Google, you don't let anyone target by income, but with your automatic optimization, are you using income as a variable? Well, Google won't tell you that. They won't tell you what race they're using. They won't tell you if they're using race as a variable, which is super important to know. They would say, well, you don't need to know that. But yes, we do, because these things are everywhere, right? So yeah, I agree that we shouldn't expect people to tell us, exactly how it works, but we should have access to the input and the output, because that's what matters when it comes to evaluating the performance and efficiency of these things, right? So it's like, if your Tesla saw that it was a 65 miles an hour, so they input that, and then they're driving 75 because you have it on Mad Max mode or whatever, it's like, that is a problem. That is a problem with your AI that we can see very clearly just from input out.
So, and that's really important, gets to the topic of kind of the nature of capitalism itself. And I'm by no means anti-capitalist, but there is something about, and maybe it's corporatism as well, where and it's the same thing people have been talking about a lot since the 70s and 80s, is that you get part of this organization and you have your role and responsibility, but then you're disconnected from your outputs and you're disconnected from your inputs, and you kind of be like, well, I don't know about that, so I don't have any responsibility in that. And it's kind of the same thing for the global nature of what's going on in terms of pollution, in terms of like, so here I am in San Francisco, I'm using plastic. That plastic, I thought that plastic was being put into recycling centers and being recycled. And then all of a sudden trade war happens with China, and we realize, well, we've been sending that plastic to China. Now they're dumping it in the ocean. It's like, it's like we're separate from these things, and we don't, all these externalities. And it's like partly on the consumer's fault, but partly also on the people who are designing the systems. But who the fuck is designing the system? Like, there's no one party who's designing the system. It seems like it's a natural system as well. So I don't know if anything sparked for you in that.
The one thing that sparked for me is like, a lot of people know, capitalism is a great driver of incentive. It's a great rewarder of incentive, all these things. You're right. It totally destroys any concern about externalities, except in how it affects. I mean, this is a cynical way to look at it. I don't believe that every business owner is just unconcerned with externalities, but largely it destroys your incentive to do anything about it unless it affects your bottom line in terms of like public relations, whatever. So what we'd want to do is usually we want to say, okay, well, let's just have a government come in and kind of regulate that. The problem is government is traditionally really bad at regulation. We're super slow. And then like, especially with tech, there's an additional problem where there's a technical side to this, a technical know-how, where the best people in theory to regulate these things are the creators, but they're also the ones who have the most incentive not to regulate it properly. And the people who are least qualified are the senators that we want to be regulating it, right? Like these guys are people who don't know how to work an iPhone, which could be used by a baby. So it's a catch-22 because it's like, well, they might end up crippling these tech companies for no reason, not really solve anything. But it's like, then this idea of self-regulation has come into Silicon Valley and, to a lot of industries. It's something called regulatory capture, actually, where the person who is supposedly being regulated has actually gained influence with the regulators, right? Mm-hmm. So this is what Google says. They say, hey, let us advise on how you regulate us. And trust us, we'll be good, right? Yeah. Like we'll be good boys. No, huge problem. It's just this intractable issue where it's like your senators are kind of out of touch. You do need to regulate technology though, in the endless march of consumerism. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, and it's a question that will become very important very soon as I mean, it's already happening where technology is starting to play such an intimate role in our lives and it's going to, I mean, there's no stopping it. It's going to continue. I mean, maybe there is stopping it. Maybe, I mean, if there's a global crisis, economic crisis, maybe it will get stopped. But yeah, it's like a lot of the signs point to this not being solved anytime soon. I mean, maybe we should be giving the senators more education in technology. Cause like, I don't know if anybody who's listening to this, if you saw it, but like that Facebook hearing was just ridiculous. Like they had no idea how to bring an understanding of technology into that conversation.
Yeah, and it's really tough because a lot of the answer is there are lobbyists who specialize in these issues. A lot of people think like lobbyists are like dark robed, and some people are kind of bad. But a lot of what lobbyists do is they specialize in a topic and they go and present on the topic to try to inform the senator or whatever. But you get right back into the same problem where it's like people who are not elected are basically running regulation. These people are usually tied to industry, and you're kind of like back at the core issue, which is, the object of regulation is becoming sort of in part the regulator. So it's really tough. And I want to say too, is like the other problem is when you don't have regulation, it's like the guru thing, right? Where the most unscrupulous guru wins. The guy who promises the most, who doesn't care the most about scamming. When there's no rules, he wins. And so we do need regulation for companies to care. Because it's like, if you're a super caring company, you're just not going to do that well. If you're just 100% green, while green is not super profitable to do, you're going to be worse off than your competitor. And so it's like, there is a natural evolution of the problem where we evolve for bad behavior so long as that there's not incentives aligned. Because I think people are just a little too idealistic about, in the absence of incentives, they just expect people to do the right thing, but they don't realize doing the right thing means competing yourself out of business.
Yeah, and self-interest. And this gets into kind of, so if I'm a senator and I've got this power and I've got a growing base of people who are voting for me and people I want to get to vote for me, and there's a lot of information that's coming into me. And then there's this lobbyist who's able to give a compelling presentation on what this thing, and they basically suck into my mind and give, allow me to influence me just by presenting the information. And it reminds me of the same thing with replication crisis, where people are creating interesting new papers that aren't backed up by a lot of evidence, because there's a incentive to publish. And then, so it's in all these different fields where the complexity of modernity is now it's really difficult to be an individual human being and put ourselves into context in this larger thing where it's like, our brains were designed to be in a savanna, and all of a sudden like technology is like changing it. And it's part of the process. Like, it's like, it's happening. There's no stopping this. So it's like, what do we do about it? Can we do anything? Like, do we have individual responsibility? Do we have free will? This is like, I get into this, it's like, philosophical stuff. Cause I think this is important because it gets into the ethics of like, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, why are we doing it? Can we do anything? Do we do anything? I don't know.
There's a lot. Which part should I take on? Should I take on? I don't think I could take on a lot of that, but
whichever you feel more called to.
okay. So I have a real passion for the replication crisis, because I think one of the big things in the 21st century, or the beginning really with like logical positivism in Vienna, was that like science is that a lot of people think like, oh, science is sort of the thing I trust. I trust science, right? But that's been breaking down a little bit, because we've been realizing, oh, science is subject to the same cultural pressures that like everything else is. And that scientists, while they are usually people who are drawn to the truth, it's about putting bread on the table, and like you get jaded and you just want to do something that gets you recognized, the recognition you deserve. And so there's been this huge problem where we've been slowly uncovering the fact that, number one of the core tenets of science is replication, but we realize that we don't incentivize replication. So science isn't really that replicable right now, because we never try to do it. And so how can we say it's replicable when we never replicate, right? But there's also another problem, which you touched on, which is that journals publish positive results. Journals are trying to get sold, right? It's like being sold a magazine. So you can think of scientists as like people finding stories, and the journalists just selecting the ones they find the most interesting. The problem is that ones they find the most interesting are surprising positive results. And surprising results, by definition, are rare, which means that scientists are like cramming their brain, and through no fault of their own, they're finding a bunch of unsurprising results over and over. And they're seeing their colleagues get ahead by finding surprising results. So they go, okay, well, I really want to find this, right? So whether unscrupulous or not, they have so much pressure, so much peer pressure, institutional pressure, that I mean the stuff that gets out there is really bad. I've covered a lot of it on my channel. I don't know if you were referencing what I've done on my channel, but there's endless examples of people basically either fabricating data or kind of fudging the numbers. It just goes, it's a gradient of, fraud. But one of the best examples I can give you, and the problem with it, because people think, well, maybe it's not a big deal if some rando person in psychology gets something wrong. Okay. God, what's his name? I'm trying to think of the sign. Hold on. Let me look this up real quick.
Sure.
We can just edit this out. It's the guy who Brian Deere exposed, the journalist Brian Deere. It's the guy who did vaccines. Andrew Wakefield. Okay. There's this guy, Andrew Wakefield, who in 98 discovered this link between vaccines and autism, which is this crazy idea, right? Like that's insane. How incredible. We've never thought of this before. Maybe autism was rising at the time. And so he linked these, and this has been a problem ever since. Most people don't know that study was fraud. It was scientific fraud. Why was it fraud? Well, because he was looking for the data, because he was working on a law panel where he was testifying against the vaccine companies before he started his scientific results. So as a scientist, what does he do? He goes and finds the evidence to fit the narrative he wants to fit, right? There was stuff actually in the study that he literally just lied about. Some of the kids had pre-existing conditions before the vaccine. He didn't report it. He just faked the whole thing. So does anybody find out about that? No. There's millions of people who still think that vaccines cause autism. The retraction is always less important than the actual publication. So people don't know that this study has been retracted. And so it just causes problems for years and years, even after we've thoroughly debunked it. It's a real problem, because people say, like, people's truth claims a lot of times in society is, well, I saw a study that said, when a lot of those studies are wrong and unchecked, unfact-checked. Peer review is notoriously bad at catching errors. People are surprised to find out. Like, what do we do? How do we evaluate truth claims from that point, knowing that nobody has time to read past an abstract, knowing that no one has time to understand the complexity of a field, to know the different standpoints? So it's really tough, but that's something I'm hugely interested in realigning scientific incentives with truth, not with sensationalism.
Well, and it goes back to the guru thing as well. And I want to add that there is, so a lot of ways, the best way, in my opinion, to find out the truth from what is not true is to give it time and let it enter the human experience through a lot of people, and then over time we find it out. And this is the same thing with replication. People try it, test it enough, and over time we get an understanding of what is actually true and what is not. And so there is actually a way, I going back to the guru thing, but actually in the spiritual sense, that in India, where a lot of the innovation among philosophy was happening, there was you basically came in through a lineage, and the role of tradition was actually to be like, okay, we've tested this through generations, and this is actually the truth as we've understood it. But then we, in America in particular, I think, have this bucking tradition, which I love. I do think it's really important to question tradition. But at the same time, there is that factor that that's what tradition is for. And also, like, you just need to give it time. But in some senses, are we running out of time now? Do we, like, and that's a big question. I don't know how to approach that one.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I agree with your comments on tradition, that being a good thing. The problem is science is like, specifically with the replication crisis, is the assumption that we are finding the errors with time is sort of, and in a pace that outstrips the errors jumping into our kind of corpus of knowledge, is sort of an assumption. And it's also just not true that this is the fastest way we could build a reliable corpus of knowledge, right? Like, it's not just enough to say, oh, well, eventually we'll figure out that it's wrong. Well, it eventually can mean 30 years later, when this sort of fundamental study of the field has now become like the main thing, and we've wasted 30 years of research just basically under the sort of theory of a guy who turns out to be wrong, right? So it's important to test often, and it's important to not just expect that it will come out. I mean, like, stuff won't come out unless we test it, right? So this is why the replication crisis only happened when people started testing. Like, when people were like, wait, do we actually believe, like, the top psychological studies? So they retested them, and like 50% didn't replicate, or something like that. Some insane number of the landmark studies didn't replicate. And
it's so hard because it's like, like the Zimbardo one, which
Stanford prison experiment. Yep.
Everyone talks about, and like, and it fits this story. It's such a good story because it fits right into our preconceived notions of like what power means. And so maybe this is, and it goes back to the philosophy thing of like Nietzsche said that God is dead and we killed him and all this different stuff. And then science comes along, and then science is a new God. But then we can't even be sure of that. So like, but this goes into the guru thing as well, because the gurus are offering certainty, and where no such certainty exists. And the only way you find that out is through suffering, like understanding that a lot of times your expectations don't match with reality, and you will be wrong and things won't go your way. But that's not the positive side. And everybody tells you to be positive and all this, BS. So I don't know, rant over.
Yeah. I think the important thing is to know that we can and should make things better. I mean, like, I think it is a sort of useless truth that we cannot perfect things, right? Like, it's true, but that we shouldn't just stop there. Like, even what we talked about with, I mean, it's been a recurring theme that like, oh, this is just this really hard problem, that there's so many problems enmeshed here. We could never fully separate it out and get to the perfect ideal thing. But I'm a huge pragmatist. It's like, that is a meaningless statement to me. Okay, sure. Now what? Now we make things better. Now we incentivize replication by publishing replication. Now we incentivize people finding the null hypothesis, which is no result at all, by publishing it, by pre-registering the report. And so we actually publish things that are basically unsurprising. Because this is how we build a reliable body of knowledge. Will science ever be perfectly aligned with like what science in theory is, like capital S science, what people think of as science? Probably not. But can we do much, much, much better than we are now? Yes, and we should. And the more people that know about it, the more people speak out about it. I mean, something that I harp on a lot, and it's just because I was sort of disillusioned. to the scientific process as it stands in the 21st century. Like, people don't know that when you peer review something, a lot of times the lead scientist does not send the peer reviewer the raw data. Think about how crazy that is. You've probably spent your whole life thinking peer review is this really reliable process. How reliable can something be when you don't have the raw data? Just the guy can just make up tables, and this happens all the time. I don't want to say all the time. It happens more often than you would like to believe, that the data is not actually, or the tables they send are not actually representative of the data. They shifted it to fit a story, right? They've also done a bunch of studies on peer review. Like, they've given the same peer reviewer or the same study to several different peer reviewers, and they all disagree on the quality of the study. One guy says it's perfect. One guy says it's flawed and it needs revision. And one guy says, this is the worst study I've ever seen. We'll never publish this, right? So it's like, how reliable can something be when you're not given the same quality metric? And that's sort of right now our standard of truth is like, is it peer reviewed? Is it not peer reviewed? People need to know about that. You know, people need to know that when fraud is reported at an institution, it is rarely investigated, not rarely prosecuted, nobody's looking into this stuff because it's a shame to the institution. This is actually a story I'm going to do soon. But it's terrible. It's like, so we should fix these things, but we can only fix them when we know there's a problem. Is it an intractable problem? Probably. But can we improve? Yes.
So it gets
over.
So it gets into the nature of education, and it's also reminding me about basically our gift as human beings, and maybe the evolutionary point, if I could even say that, of culture. And culture basically has a bunch of wrong idea inputs into it, and then over time and through education we become smarter collectively. Maybe that claim isn't actually accurate, that we are becoming smarter collectively. What do you think? Are we becoming smarter collectively?
Yeah, no, I think it depends on how you define intelligence. I think in some ways we are. In some ways we're kind of like becoming these weird cyborgs where our phones know, like our phones are an extension of ourselves, and your phone kind of knows so much about the world. It's kind of like stores so much information about the world that are most people more broadly informed? Absolutely. I think I could say that unquestionably, more broadly informed. I think we're becoming less deeply informed. I think we read so many headlines, we just watch sound bites, that we kind of know just a little about a lot. And we've traded that for knowing a lot about a little.
But that goes into something that's been happening for a while, which is that in the 1800s, the scientists could completely know all the knowledge in their field. And then now it is impossible for one scientist to completely understand their field, and they have to burrow deeper and deeper and deeper into their specialization. And that it's just, there is so much abstract information out there that it becomes impossible to think of, like, I mean, even back then it would be, you know, you'd have your specialty, but then you wouldn't be able to really understand the implications of that. It's just kind of the nature of a human being as a limited human being that can't fully encompass all the stuff that's going on there. And then goes back to the question of collective. Like, I interviewed one person who talks about how Facebook, and to a certain extent the Chinese government, is putting us into subgroups, so that it no longer really is useful to talk about myself as an individual, but it's more useful to talk about myself as an individual within this subgroup that I belong, because that subgroup is the one that's being motivated and influenced towards a particular behavior.
I think, hold on. I want to push back on something. I've read Isaac Asimov's idea where he's like, we're knowing increasingly a lot about, like, well, people have to specialize in smaller and smaller fields to know all about that field. So we know increasingly everything about nothing, I think was his quote, which is kind of funny, whatever. But I would say, I don't think most scientists feel like they don't know their field. Like, they don't fully know their field. I think a lot of, and I'll say this as like someone who more and more on Coffee Break, not on CoffeeZilla, because CoffeeZilla is kind of for fun, whatever. Coffee Break, I increasingly am going deeper, and I'm like just starting to read papers. And you find with every field, like when you get to a subspecialty, there aren't an infinite number of papers on really narrow topics.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as soon as you try to broaden, that is a problem. When you try to take something as like, you know, the human body. Yeah, now no one can know what it is. And it is also true that no scientist would say we know everything about an even tiny amount of topic, but they would say they probably are aware of every meaningful study that's been done on that topic. They're just saying that there's so much complexity in life that I can't possibly, like, we could study this forever and we'll never get it all. But yeah, no, I think great solutions to this have been done, which are like, there are literature reviews where people will cover all the relevant literature in a topic. They're not perfect, but it's better to just read the papers. But that's a great jumping off point to know, you know, what are the relevant studies in this field? Well, it's this guy 2010, it's this guy 95, it's this guy whatever, and you go read those papers and you kind of get yeah. Anyway,
so I think I want to add, for anybody listening who's really interested in this kind of like complexity. Have you read the book Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. It's a great book talking about this kind of like infinite knowledge and where it's going. So there's this last question, which is, as science becomes more important and people trust, some part of the population trusts more scientists, are you planning on, and like doctors being an extension of this kind of the practitioner, are you going to plan on taking down any of these kind of doctors who are using science in a fraudulent way in order to sell more courses or whatever? Do you know, have you been seeing this at all?
Yeah, I will be making a video very soon about a professor who has done some sketchy stuff, whatever. But it's not my dream to like talk about these things endlessly. I've just found myself in a weird position where I find people being so uncritical of these things that like I feel I found that I have an itch for this stuff. If nobody knows something is basically bullshit, it's a tick or something like that. I have to say something about it. And so there's just so much of that in the world that I feel like I'm going to spend forever talking about it. But I think to your point about people trusting science, I think we need a better societal understanding of what science is. Science is not a holistic thing. It is a fractured concept, which we use as like generally, like the scientific method is the closest thing you could get to science, or like the philosophy of science. No, even that we don't have a working definition of. People have entirely different ideas of what science means, what it could mean. And scientists just disagree all the time. So it's like when you say I trust science, which part of the science do you trust? You know, people disagree. What do you mean? Yeah. I think what is increasingly important, and it's so hard to ask of people because we have such limited time. And it's just another one of those problems that's very hard to get at. We need to expect more of the people reading science. Like the everyday layman needs to know how to read a scientific paper. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's just true. And they need to know, they need to read past the abstract, which means science journals need to start open accessing their papers. Like this is a huge problem. People don't have access to papers unless they're going to spend $100. You're not going to spend $100 to just read a 6-page paper, right? Like these are things we need to break down. And then from an kind of explainer category, I don't know if I put myself in that, maybe, an explainer category, we should expect more from our explainers. Something that drives me insane is when pop science people misrepresent science, because I think it's so detrimental to like, there should be this chain of understanding from the scientist to the learner. And you want to have as few kind of misunderstandings on the line as you can. And so often entertainers are basically turning science into this buzzy thing that's all fun and cool. And they lose all the nuance and the important nuance. And then I think you can kind of move backwards where now you don't believe the science, or you don't believe, you know, because you've seen it go wrong so many times, you know, so.
And this gets into, we need an online course or something that teaches people how to read scientific documents, because it's hard. It's not like the language that these papers are written in is not, takes training in order to understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why I'm a big believer in college. I think college prepares you to There are a lot of, I know increasingly people are doubting college a lot more. I see it all the time. I don't know your take on it. Actually, let me ask you your take on it first, real quick.
So yeah, I went to university, and I think that's the actual thing, because they're not doubting university. That I think the people that you're talking about in Silicon Valley, they're not doubting university. They're doubting finishing university. So getting into the university is the important part, because then you get the signal, and then you can drop out and start another company. But I think it depends on an individual. So I think if you come from a background where your family was in technology, or like you grew up with this stuff in the household, then college, you've already kind of been in it. You might already have this thing. But if you're coming from a background where you don't have that at home, and you, like, you can't enter that language because it's essentially a language. I think most subcultures are essentially brought together through the language that they use, and like whether you are an insider or an outsider is based on whether you can fit the mold of that language. So then college might be really important. For me personally, I love learning, and I've always kind of taught myself things. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine who is on me in terms of like, because now that I'm starting to do a lot more videos and starting to speak more, like, you have to be skeptical of the people that you're asking these questions to. And so,
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. That's
yeah,
a good point.
he's basically like you, but on Facebook Messenger, just telling me like, you're an idiot. Stop stop talking to. I'm just kidding. But and so for me, I think universities need to change a lot in order to be relevant for what's coming. And I think a lot of that can be done online. And I'm interested in figuring out how it can be done online, particularly now in the past 24 hours, of the skepticism thing, of how to teach people to be skeptical. And I think that seems to be the root of science as well. It's like, don't, like, there is truth, but it's really fucking hard to get to it and explain it.
Yeah. Hold on. I should have written notes on that, because I have a few things I want to talk about there. Number one, I'm a huge believer in college. I just disagree with how much it costs. But I think the principle of like learning basic statistics, because high school is such a joke. Most people don't hardly learn anything in high school. College is like the first time where I felt like I was actually, I'm building a body of knowledge. Oh, this is great. I mean, and I wasn't loving my degree. Like I said, I did chemical engineering. I never really used it. I didn't like it. There's a reason I got out of it, but it taught me statistics. It taught me how to read a research paper. It taught me how to think abstractly. Like, these are things that are not immediately pragmatic. Like, it's not super important that you can read a paper immediately, but it informs how you think, and it informs like your later life and what you believe about the world. So no, I'm a huge believer in people like sort of getting that basic training in how to think, how to like read things that are complex, how to think about problems that are unsolved. Like in high school, you think, oh, science is easy, and it like all fits together like a glove. And then college, you find out, oh, actually everybody disagrees. And we have no, like, we kind of know, but we're figuring it out, whatever. As to your like skeptical point, I think it's interesting, because I think skepticism is a tool, but it's not the solution. It's a tool in a tool chest. It's great to like hate on gurus, and it's great to say, yeah, they're stupid and you shouldn't believe them. But then people are like, now what? Like, what do I do now? I mean, I still have my life to live. I need to know, what do I do kind of post guru. So I try to tell people, like, the biggest thing is to learn to be an autodidact, where you're like, where you teach yourself, and to learn to do things the hard way. I mean, like, that's where you learn the lessons. Learn to not rely on somebody else as a crutch. Learn to filter through people for relevant information, to take what you need and then move on and get something from somebody else. But anyway, I think skepticism is a great tool to kind of realize that there are, aren't as easy of answers as people are promising you out there. But then what? So that's another thing that I think college helps with. I mean, people say college is a scam, but you can actually look at how much money people make after college and before college, take the average, and people make a lot more money like, if you do college, you're a lot more likely to do well. And it's just because, like you said, it's a great signal, but I also think it just helps you think better. So it's I think skepticism is a tool, not a solution. That was kind of my main point.
And then there is no thing itself. There's no, like, all of these tools are essentially just like helpful ways to do it. But then it like, there is no answer. There's no answer there to say, like, this is the thing you need to do in order to reach this goal, or reach happiness, wealth, and what was it? Wealth, happiness, and
Health, wealth, and happiness.
Health, wealth, and happiness. Yeah. There is no technique that's going to get you there.
Right. Well, it's funny because all three of them are not things that can be attacked on directly, right? Like you cannot attack your health directly. There's no like, you have to go exercise. You need to eat right, which is like eating right is kind of its own thing, right? Diet's its own thing. You can't get wealth just by thinking about wealth or talking about wealth. Well, actually, that's not true. You can get wealth by talking about wealth, but you shouldn't be able to. Yeah. You have to go do something. You have to go create something, create value. Happiness is the same. You can't. People think there's. Actually, that was going to be a hot take. Never mind. I'm not going to say that. I was going to say you think yourself into a depression. What I mean by that is by focusing on your depression, you never will get happier. Like you have to go. A lot of times, just like breaking your patterns is a huge part of getting back to normal, to your baseline. So yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, it's very true.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, and definitely I'd love to do it again. And how can people find out more about what you're working on and your YouTube channel?
You can go look up Coffee Break. I should be the first one to come up. You can also look up CoffeeZilla. I should also be the first one to come up. New Fake Guru coming soon, and we also have a big thing about science on the main channel coming out. Yeah, this is super fun, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Thanks.
Thanks.